Welcome to TradeTheMBI.com. This is John. This report is for May 1st, known as May Day. Some used to think of it as Red Day, but Donald Trump has declared it Law Day by proclamation. So happy Law Day is the new name for things. So we had a nice, a little bit extensive retest of the previous massive jump. And again, this gets back to the correlation between when the Fed stops and the music ends, you dip to the next area that the Fed decides is the support point at which then you will build off of. And that's been this wave action that we've been seeing ever since the Fed has gotten involved. And that took place right around here at the 23% end of March, and it's continuing. We had the dip below the cyan that had just begun at the start of this, which, as we've referred to as always a buy setup, but always important to clarify, always a buy when you have a, configuration intraday that suggests actually beginning that entry point. And with these ATRs, this is not uncommon. I mean, we got an ATR that's 82 plus points, which is the average true range, which is the given range on any day over the last, 14 plus. So when you have these big giant ATRs, this kind of a move is not that dramatic at all. It may seem like it, but not so much, particularly when, they're going to claim it was the news coming out of Europe, but nothing in Europe was unknown. You're also seeing a massive spike in the euro because things are so bad, which is always fun to see that. But it's also an indication that things are about to get much worse. I think you're already starting to see with the Defense Production Act being invoked when it comes to beef and poultry, like we were talking about. This means that the potential for food shortages and that could amplify. You're seeing armed people storming state houses in Michigan. You're also seeing protests in California. And that kind of social unrest is going to grow because some of these restrictions are just, number one, anti-American at their base, and number two, probably excessive when you consider even with the total number of infections throughout America, it represents the tiniest of fractions, and there are no hospitals overwhelmed. And the whole point of a lockdown in any way, shape, or form was just to prevent them from being overwhelmed. And with the supposed new volume of testing available, even if you had a hotspot and you needed to do, more extensive restrictions, these lockdowns are excessive at a minimum and counterproductive. And like I've said before, from an economic standpoint, you cannot do a staggered open of your economy. This is not going to work. So without the Fed, there's no reason this market would be, over 1,600 or less. So keep that in mind as we go forward, because you're going to have to be fluid with the situations, because while I don't expect the Fed to let things go too much, I mean, again, we're probably going to aggregate around that 50% and continue to pop off that as you find the Fed taking action to support things. From an NQ standpoint, of course, it had 76, came up against the top side of the red ABM right there and faded back just a little bit. Still have rising gold in this particular case, a slightly lower shakeout developing at this particular point. Is at the end. No, but see, here's that spike in the euro for literally basically saying that European countries have like almost no economic activity and are just completely a disaster. And so, of course, that's why the euro should rise. Because mostly they're going to put as much stimulus as the U.S. has been doing, but it's not going to change anything. Even here, we just achieved our first ability to roam freely without, and that's not even true. You can go out wearing a mask. You still have to maintain separation. There's still no restaurants open. It's as close as you would get to fascism or communist control from the old days. So it's quite dramatic and ongoing now, almost 60 days. But as more and more people are unable to sustain the extended periods, we're going to start to see, beginning now, how bad it is from a both rents and everything else, utilities and who can pay and what, because there certainly isn't being enough distributed to cover those costs for people who weren't prepared for this. Oil, with these rebalancing, beautiful thing that we've talked about, is continuing its decline. There's just, until you actually start utilizing the capacity, and the question really will become the psychological impact and whether or not people will actually go out to places when they are open, or have they been scared sufficiently enough to cease any and all activity, which is kind of really what's going to take place with this, and that's a much broader concern. Of course, within that dip, some people trade out of their gold positions in order to cover that. And that's always the issue with some of these gold setups, and that is that you will get sell-offs when the market does, because people will take their gains and utilize it to cover other positions that so they're using it as a hedge, and that's going to create a little back and forth. But again, gold's still going to be overall trending higher. From an intraday standpoint, we ended up with some nice sell signals. And then like this, this is where we talked about it. You get these pretty decent buy configurations like this, but as it crossed above, it immediately spiders with the cross below, and then that just took it back down, made new lows, created a new buy configuration, and then worked its way back through there. Remained kind of soft. And what I was talking about from an intraday standpoint is you got to see that basing at a particular level. In this particular case, you just had one test of the low. It stayed up towards near the 100% from a falling standpoint, and never could hold it. Because as soon as you came back to test it, you dipped below that next algo level, and then we kind of floated along that algo level for a little while. That was the best basing that we saw through the day, and then that propelled it back up to the lower 100%. But then as we got towards the end of the day, DOC spread after the same buy, and this is the problem with these buy continuations that we're developing. They were sustaining themselves. Some of them had nice steel resets, but as soon as they reached those 100% markers, you ended up with the separation of the cyan green, and then the turnaround fall of the red DOC, and that showed up beautifully on the Power Mode 2 as a confirmation of those setups. And then boom, the cascade lower began, and every attempt was met with just no new buyers for the most part, and that just led to utter collapse, because you really didn't get even, other than this one move that took us to the 100%. That was the last time red got above the zero on shakeout there, which usually indicates a broader distribution. So when we made the lower peak right up here at the matching or higher highs, you had that lower divergence. And if we draw a line across that, you can kind of see it pretty clearly from a trend standpoint. 3 consecutive lower peaks, each one going across. This one started out to be decent, but again, it hit that 50%, and then it began to roll over too, and that's led us to these convenient algo levels of the 2847 and the 2830 points, and it's amazing how they still gravitate right on those, and those become. And so again, we see the activity that takes place at particular algo levels. Even when it was up here and they were using that one, there was still, and this is what will happen. There's enough selling taking place in there that they just let it go to the next one, see if there's additional, and then they can buy up dwindling supply or increase supply. And when they pop it back up, they'll sell into that move back up. And that allows them to keep doing it, and they can successfully do it at higher levels going through, and that's just something that we expect to continue for the weeks and months ahead. And it's just a matter of taking advantage of those support levels, but realizing you've got to be fluid with this one. This isn't one of those situations where you can set and forget like we had earlier when the economy was actually justifying the improvement in things. You don't have that. You have artificial money, and you have to play with the algos and how they're doing it, because this is not based on any evidence based on economy or even the future potential growth in the economy. So this is about artificial injection, and that's fine. We can see it, but it's just important to keep that in mind. Like I was saying on our Skype chat, and that even from a 50K standpoint, I have no paint bar activated on here, but once that selling started from the beginning there, we've had the full breakdown and we got to the 50%, still couldn't sustain anything, and you can see it was still a continuation of lower red DOC, and even when we had the potential of an uptick right there was an immediate spidering of that one that led to the nice breakdown into the new lows. So that's where we're at. Do I still think that we'll end up with positive pops at it? Absolutely. And will they be significant? Sure, because once you eliminate the active sellers, there isn't going to be anyone trying to, from a shorting standpoint, is going to get run over pretty quickly. You've got to be able to see it when we get the signals and take advantage of them until there's a turnaround point. So that is how I would suggest evaluating and beginning to trade this, because we're going to see this continued volatility. I mentioned it in my renewal indicator report, and that I expected volatility to rise, and that's exactly what we're seeing going into May. Ergo, the axiom sell in May and go away. Well, that may be what some people are actually doing, but I think there's going to be a lot of activity going on in these next few months as this battle rages between the two camps of lockdown and do nothing, and those that want to open back up and get to work. So it's going to be just like the election. It's a battle between two camps, and I think that that's ongoing. And I think that even within the White House, you're getting, Fauci and these guys who are saying, oh no, we should be locked down through the end of the year, blah, 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 blah. And most people recognize that's not even a probability. And with the actual number of cases and deaths, you're still just on the upside. Well, you're going to be on the upside of bad flu season. You haven't really gotten beyond that, but that doesn't change the fact this is still a highly contagious thing. But with the therapies that do exist out there, if they were allowed in America, where like here in Italy, the hydroxychloroquine is being handed out free in northern cities, and that's expanding rapidly throughout here, along with being able to take that along with the zinc and the antibiotic, the efficacy of it here has been, pretty profound. And whether that expands to the rest of Europe and beyond, I don't know. But I think that you're going to see that continue to expand, because that at least provides people a safety net, because we don't know what that psychological damage to the consumer and his ability to get out and do things and interact will be going forward. So this is going to be an interesting case study from a psychological impact going forward. So we'll look forward to that, and I think that's certainly going to have an impact market-wise. So we will certainly stay up to date on that and keep trucking with the indicators, because we can see they're able to identify these sell points and go with it. So as always, though, I will keep updating the charts, and we will trade well. So we'll talk soon.